Well, good evening, everyone. If you're just logging in right now, you are joining us for a leadership focus event here at Kyria Network. These leadership focus events have been really insightful throughout this year as we've taken a different sphere of influence and we've been able to welcome a panel of contributors who have spoken into that sphere of influence and spoken into that leadership stream and brought their wisdom, their experience and their growth in this area, really. So we're just going to give it a moment for a couple more of you to log into this live. We see a few of you already joining us right now, so you're very welcome. So please let me just introduce myself and tell you more about Kyria. So I'm Amy Summerfield. I'm the CEO of Kyria Network. Kyria Network is a network for women in leadership, and we're here to champion, empower, and release women into spheres of influence, whatever that sphere, whether that be business, whether that be the charitable sector, the creative sector, home, church, etc. We're here to champion, empower, encourage, and release you. And so the purpose of these evenings is to give you opportunity to delve more into a different leadership topic. And you may know, if you've already been following these leadership focuses, after this 30-minute conversation, there's an invitation for you to join a closed Zoom room for 15 minutes where you might have another question for one of our panel. So tonight's leadership focus is actually all about finance and fundraising. And I'm sure you'd all agree with me, this is actually quite a hot topic at this moment in time when we look at the rising cost of living and our struggling organisations and churches or whatever our contexts are. There's always a little bit of a worry and there's always a bit of a concern or a struggle when it comes to finance and fundraising, isn't it? But we believe in a God who cares and we believe in a God who resources. So I'm delighted to introduce to you Shirley and Diane and Tracy, who are going to be using some of their experience and influence within this field to hopefully offer you some keys and offer you some help with regards to how we as leaders can be better stewards of finances and could be more savvy when it comes to fundraising. So they're just going to introduce themselves right now, and I'll just come over to you first, Shirley. Why not you just introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
Yeah, hi there. So my name's Shirley Berry, and I've had a variety of roles that might sort of touch on the subject. I've run a small charity. I've been a part of a national charity, which I was head of fundraising, and I work in a foundation, and also a leader in a church. So I think there's all sorts of spheres there that would touch on this topic, but it's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to have you here with us as well. And where are you joining us from, Shirley?
From Glasgow.
From Glasgow, fabulous. Thank you so much for being with us. And Tracy?
Hi everyone, I'm joining you from Essex, and I currently lead an organisation called Langley House Trust, and Langley House Trust is a Christian organisation that houses and helps offenders, and we're a £15 million organisation. We've got a couple of subsidiaries that are much smaller than that, and I also am a director of a church and a network of churches.
Great, thanks Tracy, thanks for being with us this evening. And Diane?
Hi there, my name is Diane McWilliam. I am the Scottish advisor for Cinnamon Network, and I also co-lead the church engagement team there. I also do a bit of other bits and pieces of work with voluntary sector, freelance, and also Glasgow University. And I am also coming from Glasgow, where it's sunny tonight.
Come on, it does look very sunny. We're very jealous. Well, thank you so much for being with us this evening. We've got a couple of people who are watching us right now, and we always look forward to the fact that these Kyria focus can stay out on our page and will also be used on our YouTube later so people can catch up. But let's make a start as we delve deeper into this topic of finance and fundraising. And Shirley, we'd love to come to you first, if that's okay. And the first question that we'd like to ask you is this: how can our attitude towards money and finances have a profound effect on our life and on our leadership well-being?
Great. Well, it's a great question, and it's had me thinking and pondering for this last wee while. I think for me, there isn't any disconnect. You know, I think our attitude, our approach, our reality within finance and fundraising will have an impact. And I think it is profound. on our leadership and in our well-being in that leadership and our health. And I think what kind of came to my mind as I thought about it was the words integrity and trust. And then thinking about also operating out of a place of mercy, and not being bound to the wrong things, because actually that's often what causes a breakdown in our well-being, because we get a little bit sort of incongruent, and we try to serve two masters in effect. So I think it really kind of sits in that place, and I think that can happen quite subtly, and we can sometimes be caught unaware of it. I think in a context of leadership within an organisation, as I said, I ran a small charity, I worked in a national charity, I worked in a church, and I think it's something about drawing on those verses in Jeremiah 17, where it talks about blessed is the person who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. They'll be like a plant rooted by waters, and even in times of drought, they'll produce good fruit. And I think that verse has always been quite close to my heart when I've tried to lead in a financial situation, because there are times of drought.
Yeah.
There's times where things are complex and difficult. And how do you lead in that with integrity, with relationship that doesn't impact your well-being and health, both with God and with one another. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges in leading, because the reality is that there are going to be times of change. It's not, somebody said to me once, it's not that the money all dries up. There's the same amount of money that goes around. It's just the landscape changes, and you have to figure out what it looks like, where that's going to come from, and be creative within it. But I think in amongst that, or in the midst of that, sometimes as leaders, we can often sacrifice relationships, and we can find ourselves perhaps suffering from that in our well-being. So I think that verse in Jeremiah is very close to my heart. And then also thinking about what is in our hands, I think that's been really helpful in keeping a leader healthy. It's not all about just more, and it's not all about following the trend. It's thinking about what do you have in your hand and how can you use it. Because I think God sort of principles that, doesn't he? That, there's no point in asking for more when you've got something, thinking about the boy with his lunch and feeding the 5,000, or the widow's offering. Time and time again, there's a real principle of just using what God gives us and expecting that God will multiply in the oddest of places, and looking for it in that way. And just finally, I would just share something about, we all know the parable of the shrewd manager that we find in Luke's gospel, and we know that that's not preached on very much because everybody's kind of a bit confused by it. But there's a wonderful commentary by Kenneth Bailey, the theologian, and he kind of pushes in, and I would encourage enders listen to this to go away and look. There's a YouTube a talk by him, right. But that's where the mercy comes, the leadership to keep our well-being and our health. It's operating out of that place of mercy. That parable, there's actually a parable and a poem in there, and Kenneth Bailey would say the parable is about the manager who accepts that he's mucked it up, but he falls on the mercy of the master. And also the poem is about how you cannot serve two masters. So for me, those are really deep principles for keeping health, keeping a relationship, and also finding our way through what is often a functional thing, which is finance, but actually it's a heart thing, which is following God. So, yeah.
Wow, what a great start. Thank you so much, Shirley, for that wisdom already. And that piece of writing that you referred to, do send it to us and we'll pop that out on the link later, because that sounds like a wonderful resource for us all to engage with. If you're just tuning into this live, a reminder that you're watching a conversation about leadership in finance and fundraising. There is an opportunity at 8:30 at the end of this live to join us in a Zoom room. Look out for that link in this chat bar. Just join at any time and just feel free to wait in the waiting room, because you may have a question a little bit more to what Shirley has just talked about, or Tracy or Diane in a moment. So we'll carry on and we'll come to you next, Tracy. You know, as leaders, we're called to be great stewards of our resources, aren't we, including finances, but we're also called to exercise faith. And I wonder, for you and your experience, is there a tension here, and how can leaders navigate this tension well?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Well, I think there is a bit of a tension at times, and it's interesting that Shirley mentioned the fact of know what's in your hand, because I think good stewardship starts with knowing actually what are the resources that you've got currently, you know, how much, you know, God's given us the God-given ability to understand finances. We don't need to be accountants to understand the basics of finances, of how much is in the bank, how much comes in on a monthly basis, how much do we need to spend. You know, my accountant keeps saying things like cash is king, and it truly is with money, isn't it? You know, but what cash you've got is the important bit. And even if you're a very successful organization or church or charity, actually you can run out of cash very easily. So knowing your true position is first and foremost. So then you can actually work out what the gaps are, because when you know what the gaps are, you actually know what you need faith for. And I think that's the first and fundamental thing you need to understand, because if you don't understand those gaps, you're not going to be able to pray, you know, into it. And I think God gives us the, you know, the stewardship to actually firstly do all we can practically to get ourselves in a good position. I think Shirley spoke a bit about that, but also knowing where we need to be. So understanding really what resources it takes to fulfill the vision that we've got, or the current work that we're undertaking. And actually, you know, not boxing God in, because I do think that when we have faith for finance, actually sometimes God comes back in something different than we perhaps anticipated. Yeah, so I think it's understanding that. But a little example I would give is we got notice that we were going to lose a grant of 1.4 million. Wow. It was going to go to open tender. It did go to open tender. The open tender that went to the open market, which is a very busy market that I run the charity in, it was clear that the open tender was something we couldn't deliver mission on. And I think that's first and foremost, that when you understand what you've been called to do, if you understand that that work is never going to be done through a contract, there's no point in going for that contract, and we didn't. Yeah. And the government officials were gobsmacked, really unbelievably gobsmacked that we didn't go for it. Miraculously, God answered our prayer in the sense of no one else went for that tender. Wow. And the government officials within a few weeks came to us and said, would you carry on delivering that work? And we got that work for another 2 years. That's now, amazing. God answered it in a miraculous way. I couldn't have foreseen that was going to happen, and God was going to foresee it. But us doing all practically, I actually worked out a contingency plan of what we would do if we didn't get that money, because you've got to do that. You've got to act practically. And I think that's the balance of faith and finance, that actually, you know, we've got to do everything we can to plan for the worst case scenario, but believe in the best case scenario. And I think that is what faith and finance is about.
Really good. Thanks, Tracy, for that great wisdom. And yeah, Diane, we'd love to come to you next. What attitude should we as Christians carry about finances? Avoiding the worst extremes of poverty and prosperity mindset, what would you say is the attitude that we as Christians should carry about finances?
I think the attitude we should carry about finances is the same attitude that we should carry about everything else. Humility and being like Jesus. Yeah. We look at the fruit of the Spirit. We look at that amazing passage in Philippians where it talks about how Jesus humbled himself. We hear the challenge over and over again in Scripture about becoming like Jesus, becoming more like Jesus, being refined, being honed, being sanctified. We need to be like Jesus, and that is at the very heart of the attitude that we hold as we look at every aspect of our life, not just our finances. But I did want to just pick up a couple of things. So first, thinking about trust and thinking about fear. These two things sit in opposition, really. But we read in Psalms, "The Lord is my shepherd; I have everything that I need." And trusting God that He knows what's going on. And I appreciate that you might be listening to this thinking that's just really cliched, but there's truth in it. And I'm sure Shirley and Tracy and Amy as well will be able to testify as I can that there is truth in that. The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything that I need. Mm-hmm. And fear, John writes, there's no fear in love. Perfect love casts out all fear. And I think sometimes we just get our knickers in a bit of a knot over finances and fundraising, and especially if it's something we've not had a lot of experience of, or we're perhaps not very confident in. Get advice if you don't go for training, but there is no fear in love, and God's got you. God's got you. The other I suppose contrasting mindsets I'd bring in is ownership and generosity. Tracy was talking there about stewarding our finances, and I think if we hold what we have with open hands, recognizing that, again from Psalms, everything belongs to God, it's all His, for Him to direct our use. All we're doing is kind of caretaking, effectively. Everything is His, and so we hold what we have with open hands, and that sits beautifully with this whole attitude of generosity. How can we bless? How can we serve? How can we give? Even, again, parable, the widow with the mite, even just the tiniest amount. There's something, I think there's something very profound about being generous with what we have, and not hoarding or grabbing. And again, Jesus, lots of stories that warn us against that. God loves a cheerful giver, it says in Corinthians. and actually, we, even in our house, one of our fun things to do, we, our tithe to the church and our giving all happens, but there's a bit where we've got, like, okay, here's all the money, what we're going to do with it this year. There's a big debate around the dinner table, and people pitch for all sorts of things. But that spirit of generosity sits and helps us to keep those extremes that you talked about. I think we do need to guard against a poverty mindset, and I think we do need to make sure we're looking at Scripture wisely and not getting caught up in the whole prosperity thing. But I think if we are grounded in Jesus,
that's absolutely true. Great wisdom, but great reassurance there, isn't there, that we're held by the God who knows us and who cares for us. So this question is actually to all of you, but we're going to come to you, Shirley, first. And all of you have experience in this field of finance and fundraising, and I wonder, what are some of your keys when it comes to those two subjects? What would you say are your top tips? So Shirley, over to you first.
Yeah, well, I would kind of just re-emphasize what Tracy touched on, and what I kind of touched on was you need to know your facts, because I think in leadership sometimes we find ourselves thinking that we delegate, and delegation is a good thing, but if you don't know exactly what's happening, then you can't work out a vision, and you can work out of a place of reality, but also you can't help lead others in that place. And then I think the other thing is to have eyes that can see further than the normal, so I think particularly in Christian context, we worry about crossing a line somewhere into what's perceived as a secular side of fundraising and finance. And I would say to people, please don't do that, because everything is God's, and actually where I found most help is, look up the the governing bodies of fundraising, the Chartered Association of Fundraisers. There's great information, great resources. Join it. Go on their training and have great sort of insights there. And as Diane touched on, don't just assume anything when you meet somebody. You're just never quite sure what is there. And I think working out of that humility and integrity and be creative in your expectancy.
Really great top tips there, Shirley. Thank you. What about you, Tracy, when it comes to your top tips?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say be clear on what missional outcomes or areas you're called to, and ask yourself the question, are you spending the resources on those things? Because I think that's first and foremost. For instance, my organisation is changing offenders' lives for the better. So therefore, is everything we spend our money on doing that? And if it isn't, why do we spend our money on it? And, if you've got high missional outcomes or activities that are producing, those areas that you want, and they're funded or producing a surplus, you're in heaven. It's a match made in heaven. But obviously, if you're doing it and they make it a loss, then actually that's where your faith comes in, because actually, where can you get that money or bridge that gap? If they're not contributing to your mission, why are you doing it? Be clear, cut loose those things, stop doing them.
Very good. Yeah. And Diane?
Yeah, I've been ticking things off my list. A trainer in me wants to just launch forth. I won't, but picking up on both what Tracy and Shirley have said. One of my big bugbears when we're looking at, particularly when applying for funding and grants and stuff, is that you need to read the criteria and read the guidelines from the funder, so that you know what they're interested in. There was some research done, I don't know, a few years ago now, and they discovered that something like only 1 in 3 people, so a third of applicants, actually had bothered to read the criteria and read the guidelines.
Wow.
And of those other 2/3, of course, there was loads of folk who were ineligible for a whole range of reasons because they hadn't read the guidelines. So read the criteria, look at what the funder's interested in, do a bit of research, find out what they like, and even down to the size of grants. There's no point in asking for 20 grand if the funder just gives grants of 2,000 or 3,000, or vice versa. So understand your funder. If you can get in touch with them, some funders appreciate a phone call or a conversation beforehand. Not all, so check that out as well. But get to know your funder as best you can. And the other thing is just really practical. Answer the question, no more, no less, and make sure your budget adds up. Because the last thing you want is an arithmetical mistake at the bottom on your bottom line. So just dead practical.
They're really great practical tips, and I'd just love to throw in a few offerings of my own actually as well. I do think some of my experience in this area, we can't afford to not invest heavily into our communication and relationships, can we, as well? I think you've all implied in some way, shape or form about how this is an area that we're sometimes too silent in, or maybe we get too shy on. And I actually think some frank talk and some clear communications and relationships, as we actually make it okay to talk about money, okay to talk about the need for it, knowing that it's done from a relational place, doesn't actually then cause offence. And if it does cause offence, that's something you can work through. So I think that top tip of communication and relationship is key for me. And that also relates, dare I say, that actually prayer is such an important priority in this. And if we're growing organisations and a culture of prayer, that not only raises our faith, but it also communicates need as well, doesn't it? And so if we're being clear in what our prayer is from an organisational point of view, if we're being clear in what our prayer is for an expectation of finances and resourcing in a particular area or a project, then that ebbs and flows into communication and relationship. And sometimes that just urges a response, it urges an appeal, it urges someone to want to graciously and generously give. Not, of course, in any way from a place of manipulation, but from a place of that good news and that faith swelling up in us, really. So I think, communication, relationship and prayer would be something that I'd offer. Well, we're coming to a close shortly. We've just got one more question that's going to come to all of you. If you've been watching this live and you do have a question that's maybe that bit more personal in nature, you would have seen through the comments that there's a Zoom link that's popped up. You can join that Zoom link right now. Just have a wait in the waiting room, and this live will finish in about 5 minutes. If there's a question that you've got for one of our contributors this evening that's maybe of a bit more of a private nature, that's not recorded on the Zoom, and it will just be there for 15 minutes. So do feel free to join that Zoom room now, and we're just going to pop it up one more time on the chat page just as we start to conclude this time. So Shirley, we're just going to come back to you for the concluding question this evening. And actually, you've already recommended something already, but what would you say are your recommendations about organisations and resources that can help leaders grow in their financial and fundraising abilities?
Yeah, so I think this fundraising is a great resource, and I think there's lots of good learning that can be gleaned from there. Yeah. But I think on a relational basis, it's speaking to anybody who has been in that kind of arena and build up personal contacts that you can just bounce things off of, and link in with current networks that know what's changing in the landscape. You know, there's no point in building your own little tower of kind of thought process when we know that things can change quite quickly. And so it's important actually that you kind of keep in with a current group. So I would really say seek out friends and spend time with them.
That's good. Yeah, thank you for that, Shirley. And what about you, Tracy? Any organisations or resources?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Shirley's fundraising regulator, but also NCVO. They've got some budgeting information that helps you budget for your charity or for your organisation.
Right. And it would be great if we could get all these links from you all, and then what we'll do is we'll pop that in some follow-up chat. So don't worry if you've missed some of those links, we'll make sure that they get to you. And we've also got some people in the waiting room already, so that's wonderful. Before we conclude with Diane and then we start to close down this live, just one last opportunity. Do join that Zoom with others who are in the waiting room now, just for an opportunity to maybe ask another question with regards to finance and fundraising to either Shirley, Diane or Tracy. But Diane, recommendations from you there about organisations, resources that could help us as leaders in finance and fundraising?
Sure. Cinnamon Network. I love getting to do an advert without having to shoehorn it in. Yeah, Cinnamon exists to be genuinely helpful to churches and Christian organisations who are trying to set up social action projects, and that includes a whole range of resources and training around funding and fundraising. Find us at cinnamonconnect.co.uk. Lots of resources on there, free to register, and your regional advisors and national advisors would be really happy to help. With my little Scottish hat on though, just to say NCVO are great. Scottish version is SCVO, and Northern Ireland has got NIPCA as well. So there's each nation's got its own little voluntary organisation or voluntary sector interface.
Wonderful. Well, that's really helpful, and we're 2 minutes towards past, so we get the award for this so far this year of being the leadership focus that finishes on time, so yay for us. So we are going to close this live. Thanks to all of you who have been watching. Once again, if you do want to just join us over at Zoom now, just click the Zoom link that you can see on this chat. You're just going to be with us for 15 minutes. It's a closed Zoom that won't be recorded if you have another question with regards to finance and fundraising. But Shirley, Tracy and Diane, thank you so much for your time this evening. We're really, really grateful for your wisdom. And we will turn off this live now and say goodbye to all of you who are watching.
Bye.
Bye.